Everybody, thank you for coming. The voice you've been hearing until now is Phoebe, the IT director at NYSCAA, and she'll be on with us listening to your questions or watching your questions and such as we move along. So thanks, Phoebe. Dietra, Harvey from Mohawk Valley and I are here today to present to you. We hosted a poverty simulation together last fall. We'll be doing a couple more at her agency in 2014, and we thought that by doing this together we could sort of give you both perspectives. I can tell you what you'll be hearing from me, and Dietra can tell you what it's like being on the other end. As we go through the presentation today, you may have some questions, and you'll see that there is a question box over on the right side of your screen, and you are more than welcome to type in your questions as we're going along. Phoebe's going to be keeping track of those for us. She'll mention them to us if they fit in with a particular section, if we don't cover it. If that doesn't happen, at the end, Phoebe will sort of give us a synopsis of those questions and we'll cover them, and then you'll have time to continue asking questions. Okay? And another thing that we'll do with Phoebe, and this is the only poll we'll have today, but Phoebe will post a poll. We're just curious how many of you are actually already planning to have a poverty simulation during this coming poverty tour. So if you are planning to do that, Phoebe will put up a poll and we'll ask you to let us know.
Okay.
Can you put that one up, Phoebe?
Yep. And Kim, you actually don't see it, but the votes are coming in, and let me go ahead, and it looks like 80% have voted and 100% are saying yes. Let me share those results out. And I'll turn it back to you, Kim.
Okay, that's all right. So we know as we're moving forward, we're just going to assume everyone here is planning on having a simulation then. All right. So you may not all know exactly what a poverty simulation is. You may have a vague idea. So we'll just really quickly tell you that what this poverty simulation is it's sort of a portrayal of what it's like to live in a low-income household. Not the poorest of poor households, but a household that is living right on the edge, and based on one or two events or one or two decisions, they may either make it through the month successfully or not. The whole purpose of the simulation is to give people a better understanding and insight into what it's like to live in such a household. And that can be very helpful for people who are working in community action, who are employers, who are making policies for any number of audiences. What happens is participants come in, they receive a brief introduction, and then they're assigned to a household. They meet up with other members of that household. They go through a packet of information they've been given. And then at that time, we start role-playing through 1 month. And the way the month plays out is we have 4 weeks. Each week takes 15 minutes. So there's an hour period where people are simply going through the motions of going to work, getting the kids to school and daycare, getting bills paid, applying for resources, and it's sort of very fast-paced. They've got some information, but they don't have real directions. They have to figure out what to do. It gets a little bit hectic, and then all of a sudden it's over. At the end of those 4 15-minute units, we have a debriefing, which is usually about a half hour to 45 minutes, and during that time people sort of get to process through what they've experienced. The entire event takes around 2 hours with the introduction, the full month of 15-minute weeks, and then the debriefing. It can go a little bit over that, or it can be a little bit under as the schedule requires. And the whole event is facilitated by the NYSCAA staff, and generally, if you guys are doing this as part of your poverty tour, there's probably no cost involved. Sometimes when we come in and do more than one in an area, or it's not part of the poverty tour or our training schedule, there's minimal fees, and those are arranged on a case-by-case basis. Dietra, I did a ton of talking there. Do you want to throw anything else in about the event?
Nope, you covered it all. That's good groundwork.
Okay. So the next aspect of this is partnership. Definitely this is something that we do in partnership with your agency, and it's really important that we sort of define our roles and understand that partnership right up front. And Dietra, I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was really important. When we decided to do the simulation, of course, we connected with your office, and immediately I got correspondence from you that began to give me the step-by-steps. That was very, very helpful in starting the process and knowing the scope of what we needed to do on our end to build the partnerships to have a successful simulation.
All right. So starting really early and developing a relationship, another thing that was great with Dietra and with some of the agencies that we've done simulations with is I've been able to go out and meet them and see the space we're using and things like that ahead of time. That may not happen with every site going through the tour this year, but developing that partnership ahead of time and working together is a key to having this be successful. Beyond our partnership of NYSCAA and your agency, there's also a team that your agency will develop. Sometimes it's a team of just people within your agency. Sometimes it's a team of people that include board, staff, and partner organizations. In working with Dietra, the example that we're sort of using today, our team also involved one of the people at the site that we were using. Dietra, do you want to talk a little bit about how you created your team?
Yes, I did our team by just adding on the layers when it was necessary. Our planning team just consisted of 3 people within our agency, of which I would do the footwork and report out just to make sure that we were on target. We did use the event planning checklist that NYSCAA sent us as our guide. And when it was time to add on the media piece, we brought in the media person. When it was time to have more hands-on with the facilities and the event planning staff at the local college where we hosted our simulation, then we added that on. So we did it in layers.
And Dietra, you also, we held your simulation at the local community college, so you also reached out and used their facilities person too. Do you want to talk at all about how that worked? Or?
Yes, of course, identifying the most appropriate space at the college was very important, and fortunately they were able to shift some things around so that we could use the largest space, the Jorgensen Center, which can host thousands. So that was a fortunate thing that happened for us, but we stayed in contact pretty much weekly, making sure that they had the schematics for the floor plan, that we would do our own personal walkthroughs, just every step of the event inside the Jorgensen Center and all of the other spaces that we used for our symposium. We mapped out every single step, timing, everything.
And that's the team, as Dietra's explaining, it's sort of her team developed as the planning went on, and that's certainly a really good way to do it. One of the things that I wanted to mention about her team is they were very accessible to me. We all communicated. I actually went to the college, met with the on-site person there who's a college employee, and walked through what the event would look like there. We provided maps of how to lay out the tables and chairs and things. So we really did all work together as a team as we moved forward in that planning process. Planning is a huge part of the event. In fact, I would say, Dietra, I don't know what you think, but I would say the planning is like 99% of a poverty simulation. The day of the event, it just flies by.
I would agree with that 100%. Planning, it takes up a lot of time. Fortunately for us here in our agency, I'm the community resource specialist, so that is my job. And every agency might not be fortunate enough to have an individual who's dedicated to building those relationships and putting collaborations together, such as a poverty symposium or simulation. So in your planning, when you get that event checklist from NYSCAA, really go through it and make sure of the percentage of your time that you can devote to making it all come together, and how much you are going to have to divide it out to others, and how accessible those individuals will be to you. Because staying on top of the planning is, yes, 100% of the success of the event.
And NYSCAA does really give you a timeline and a list of events, tasks that need to be done, but there is a lot of work on that end. And so if you don't have someone in Dietra's position, you don't have a planner, picking somebody who's going to be your simulation coordinator, whether it's a staff person or a board member or a volunteer, having one person who can sort of oversee all of that and work directly with us is really key. So the specifics. Initially what happens is 6 to 8 weeks before the poverty simulation, your committee will sit down, you'll decide exactly who your audience is, and the audience can vary. We've done simulations that are specifically for staff, just a staff development opportunity. We've done simulations that were for elected officials where the agency was bringing in as many people from county and statewide and local municipal offices as they could, and the idea was really to just get a broader sense of what was going on in their community out to their elected officials as they're making policy decisions. The event can be held for partner agencies, it can be held for the media, it can be a mishmash of some staff development and some partners invited and a couple elected officials. But that's something that will be really key to decide early on, is who is the audience, and then of course selecting your date has been part of your tour planning, so that won't be such a big deal with this group, and then selecting a location. The simulation, as it's boxed, and I'll talk in a couple minutes about how we can sort of work within that, but as it's boxed, the out-of-the-box presentation requires 3,000 square feet. That involves having 88 participants and about 15 volunteers. Your size may be smaller, it may be a little bit larger, but that's a good number to work with, is that 3,000 square feet is about what it takes to have the event. So early on, those are your main concerns. Another thing to understand early on is that there are two different groups of people involved in the simulation. One is your group of volunteers, which will be from a dozen to 15, and then the other group is your participants. And I think, Dietra, that's one of the hardest things to sort of understand up front, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that we had several emails going back and forth, and I was saying, please help me, I'm not understanding.
Right.
You know,
so
it's like I'm 5,
so,
just so that I can get it.
If you haven't been to a simulation, it's a little bit hard to envision all of it. So I'll just take a minute and try to explain. What happens during the simulation is your participants are assigned a role in a family. So they sit in these little clusters of chairs. Families can be from 1 to 5 or 6 people. And so they'll sit in a cluster with their other family members, and those are the homes, so to speak. Beyond that, on the fringe of the simulation area, or depending on how it's set up, sometimes in a separate adjoining room or down one side, separate from all of these little clusters of chairs, there are tables and chairs that are set up with volunteers. And these tables and chairs represent the general employer, the healthcare facility, the community action agency, the power company, the landlord, all of the things, all of the community people that you would interact with during the course of a typical month. So those stations on the outside are filled by volunteers, and they get an orientation, and they have a packet of information and materials that helps them play that role. And I say play with some hesitancy, because this really isn't a game. It's a tabletop exercise, and it can be very serious and intense. So I use that word play hesitantly. But they'll fill these roles on the outside or wherever we set up the tables, and as the 15-minute weeks progress, the participants will go to those stations and interact with those people. So the people filling those community roles are your volunteers. The people who are assigned a role in a family are the participants. All of those people will have a very intense and eye-opening experience of what it's like to live in poverty, but from a slightly different angle. The volunteers are acting outside of the families, and so their experience is a little bit different. Okay. So 4 weeks out, you'll start to familiarize the committee with materials. I'll be sending things to you. You'll be recruiting your volunteers for those community stations, and you'll probably begin to invite and register your participants. Dietra, you handled all of the invitation and registration of your participants at your agency.
Yes.
Right. And was, for us, we can do it either way. We can handle the registration, or you can handle the registration. Do you think there's a better, is it better to do it with at your agency, or what do you think?
I found that it was very helpful for me to do it here because I knew the schedule of, when I was doing the email blast or sending letters, when we uploaded everything onto our website, the phone calls that I was making, so I could really have a handle on everything better by doing it in-house.
And that worked fine for us too. If we could just check in and say how many people, how many participants do you have at this point, how many roles are we going to need, that sort of thing, and that worked fine. If your agency doesn't have the capacity to do the registration, we can work with you on that and do that, but I do think if you have that capacity, it benefits you. Dietra, you also did all of the volunteer recruitment. You want to talk about that at all?
Yes, that was. And I started to do that early. As soon as we made the decision to do the simulation and I had somewhat of an idea of what it was, I immediately began to speak to people. And I just had a sound of excitement in my voice. And so for months, I was talking about this simulation. And so the word, started to spread. And then, of course, we use the participants from our coalition. We have a coalition of economic justice. We meet monthly. I tapped into those individuals. And then every civic organization that I've ever had any relationship with in the community, I reached out to them. So my own personal relationships and, community affiliations, I just reached out to everyone. And I think by doing that, not only did it benefit us and the degree and range of volunteers that we had for the simulation, but it really did tap into such a large portion of our community. It just went beyond the scope of our agency. And so that was very good. That was exciting. But it's a good opportunity to really get your community involved.
And one of the things that we did with the simulation that we worked on together last year was we let it grow. So Dietra, in the end, I think, what did we have, 120 or some number of participants?
We were up to about 140 for the simulation.
Okay, so we actually created a bunch of extra families, and we had the space to expand, and we were able to do that fairly successfully. So when you look at our materials and they say that the kit can accommodate up to 88, we're pretty comfortable accommodating up to 150 with some accommodations, with a bigger space and with some extra volunteers. The other thing that I'll say about volunteers is, as we're coming to town to do your poverty tour, depending on how many NYSCAA staff are coming, you can use us. Well, I'll coordinate, but the other staff that come can also fill some roles. So if you're struggling with having 15 volunteers, NYSCAA staff may be able to fill some of those. I know also that some of the folks that are planning on having poverty simulations later in the year are hoping that they can volunteer at some of the earlier simulations at other agencies. So there may be some help with those volunteer roles if you need it. We also have some ideas on who you can reach out to as far as local college and even high school classes and things like that. We can talk some. So if you're struggling with that, recruiting the volunteers, we can work with you on that. The participants, it's really important that you've decided who you're hoping to get there, who your target audience is, and then we can help you once you've got that target audience. And in how to reach out to them as well. So suddenly it will be just about 2 weeks out, and that's when you really want to start getting some information out to your media. And when I say that, that's the media that you're reaching out to simply for media coverage. If part of your target audience is reporters, you would be reaching out to them and inviting them as participants. But simply for your media coverage, 2 weeks out, we'll provide you with some templates, and then you can take it from there. And Dietra, do you want to talk about, you guys did an amazing job with media, so can you talk about that?
Right, and we did some of our media, it came later in our planning. Actually, the pre-planning and getting the word out, on our own, we had actually, for the most part, we were 90% filled before we did any media. But what it did for us, we went on television. We have a segment, it's called News Talk. You get 5 minutes to talk, and as soon as you mention poverty simulation and what that is, they get excited, and you get a couple extra minutes to talk. And we also did radio, and we did some press releases. And we did receive feedback primarily from our press releases, and of course people will see you and they'll say, I saw you on television, that sounded interesting, I'd like to attend. So it was very exciting to see how media fit into that. The other thing that I did was I reached out to one of our local reporters who had covered a few stories on some other events that I had done, and I asked her would she consider being a part of our simulation and writing a story. And she, of course, sent it out to her editor, and it was, hurrah, hurrah in the newsroom, because there were so many reporters who wanted to be assigned to come out to cover the event. She was the lucky one who was chosen, and I think she did an excellent job. She did have some ideas as to what she wanted to do, and so Kim and I had to communicate and clarify that. And once all that was ironed out, I think it turned out really well.
And certainly your local media make great participants in the simulation, and we really encourage you to try and get them registered as participants in addition to getting some coverage. 2 weeks out, the other things that you might be looking at is meeting with the site staff if you're holding it off-site, sort of walking through what that's going to look like. If you're providing refreshments, you really want to get those arrangements made. Refreshments are not required, but quite often we'll have agencies decide that they want to have at least, beverages before the simulation starts, and often people will have some kind of a snack and beverage during the debriefing. That's totally fine with NYSCAA staff. It works with our facilitation. It's not required. About 2 weeks out, the other thing we do is we start providing volunteers with the materials that they'll be using to sort of familiarize them with that. We send those out as PDFs. We can also mail them through regular postal mail if PDFs don't work for you. Dietra, do you want to say anything about how the volunteers reacted getting that stuff, or?
Yeah, they were very happy to receive it in advance. And, of course, there are some guidelines about how you get that out. So, I just did a lot of, I'm going to show up at your agency and drop off the materials. But it gave them an opportunity to review the roles that they had been assigned to. And that made them, of course, more comfortable. But the other things that Kim and I did was we set up 2 conference calls for our volunteers, so that once they had the role in their hand, they could actually log into that conference call and begin and ask questions, ask Kim all the questions that they needed to ask. That was very helpful, because the next week we did a live orientation, but I think the conference calls really did help to make the transition into the actual event smoother.
And that is certainly something that we'll do with each of our simulations as requested. And the other thing I just wanted to backtrack, we didn't really mention, we'll provide you with a list of what the volunteer roles are, and then how you and your volunteers decide which volunteers are filling which roles is up to you. Sometimes people will just assign them based on their own knowledge of who the volunteers are. Sometimes they'll ask for volunteers for specific roles. We did a small simulation in Troy right around Christmas, and we were using volunteers from the local college, and I sent out the roles and actually asked people to sign up to volunteer for the specific roles. So you can do that a couple different ways, and we can work with you on that. And yes, we did a volunteer conference call about a week before, and then I guess it was actually the night before we did our orientation. So I'll first say 2 days out, you want to send an email reminding all of your volunteers, all of your participants, all of your media. Make sure your refreshments are set if you're doing that. And then the day before the event, we held a volunteer orientation. We will try to do that when we're on tour. It'll really depend on the timing. So as we're setting up your specific tour dates and you're deciding which day you're going to have your simulation, keep in mind that if you want an in-person volunteer orientation, we've got to be able to be there the day before. So that's something we can talk about as we're scheduling your specific tour visits. The volunteer orientation, Dietra, you fed them pizza. We had it after work, like around 5 o'clock, I think it was.
Yes.
And that seemed to work really well. I think we only had one volunteer that wasn't able to make it, and you had a big simulation, so we had something like 25 or 30 volunteers.
Yes.
During the volunteer orientation, it lasted about an hour. We sort of went through what the simulation would be like, and then we let people ask their specific questions. And although they'd all had paper, some of the documents that they'd be working with, at this orientation was the first time they actually saw their packet. So they saw all of the materials. And that there are extra things, you know, they're depending on what role they're in. So that was really helpful for them, I think, to sort of familiarize themselves with the pieces, not just the PDF that they'd been sent.
Mm-hmm. I would
the
agree
other
with
thing
that.
that happens either the evening before or very early the day of is the room gets set up. And in a perfect world, what happens is the site where you're having your simulation sets up the tables based on a map we've provided them. We can also set it up, and we've done that. It takes probably an hour, hour and a half time for NYSCAA staff to get all of the chairs and tables set up as needed. But regardless, one way or the other, the evening before ideally or very early on the day of the event, the room gets set up. And then all of a sudden it's the day of the event. And Dietra, I think, do you want to describe like how that day went?
Oh, well, the day went very well. We started, of course, you know, early. Fortunately for us, the event staff and the facility staff at the college set the room up. So we walked in to find all the chairs in place. So that was really, really nice. So it just gave us an opportunity to do the other smaller things, you know, preparing for the participants as they arrived and making sure that our volunteers knew where their stations were. And that gave them the additional time to kind of open up their packets and look at their materials again, which was very helpful because once the simulation starts, you know, it's live, so you don't have the time to kind of go back and to review your materials. So the morning, because of the pre-setup that we had, it was just easier for us to greet our participants coming in and give the opportunity for our volunteers to take their stations and review their materials.
And then what the typical simulation looks like is there's an introduction. Sometimes you'll have a local dignitary come to kick off the day. Maybe it's the ED from the agency. It can be our ED, Carla, but we sort of give an introduction, thank everybody for being there, perhaps share some statistics specific to the community we're in, and then we're off. And we have 4 15-minute weeks. We give people about 2 minutes in between each week to regroup, and that time just flies by, and people are amazed when those 4 weeks are over. At that point, we give people another 2-minute break, and then we go into a debriefing, and there's never any issue in getting people to share. At the debriefing, people have all kinds of things to share, and sometimes they've had some very eye-opening moments, epiphanies, some aha moments, and so we'll talk about that, and then we have an evaluation that we work on with you. NYSCAA likes to get some feedback, but then we'll work with you. I think, Dietra, you had all open-ended questions. for
Yes.
yours, right?
Yes.
And that's if because that was what they wanted, and they wanted to see what was going on, that was what the evaluation looked like. If you have nothing that you necessarily ask us, we'll at least have a couple of Likert scales, you know, on a scale of 1 to 5, rate, you know, this. So, but we do ask for some kind of evaluation, and then it takes us a little while to get out of there. With Dietra's Mohawk Valley's event, they moved right on to a luncheon, but our staff did need some time in the space we were in to pack up all of the materials. It does, as hectic as it gets, the materials also get a little bit all over the place. So after the event, there's about a 45-minute time period that we still need that space. And certainly you can go on to your next event, and NYSCAA staff sticks around and takes care of that. Anything else you want to say about that, Dietra?
No, I thought it went very well, but I would agree that, you know, if you have to set it up yourself, then you definitely want to allow yourself the time, and for, you know, after the simulation, the cleanup time. So what location that you decide to choose, just make sure that, you know, you have built in that extra time for those things to happen.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think we'll move on to questions and answers. And you should have all received 2 handouts either yesterday or today. One was the slides that we've just gone through, and in between each slide you had a white page of notes that was sort of our notes to make sure that we covered. That should give you most of the information that we've said today. The other handout that you had is just a little handout. It's actually part of our brochure. If you have our trifold brochure, you'll recognize that most of it was from that brochure. And that's one of the things I want to point out is on that brochure, it hasn't been updated to reflect our experience doing these bigger events right now. So it still says that we can accommodate up to 88. We can actually accommodate up to about 150. So Phoebe, do we have any questions typed in? I'm guessing that's a no from Phoebe.
I'm sorry about that.
Right,
we do
and
have
I'm
a couple questions, Kim, but they were just about the handouts. A couple people registered late, and they're wondering if they could get the handout sent, and
Absolutely.
I'll note that.
And what I'm going to do is move on to the next slide. Our contact information is right there, and what I'll tell you is if you have not received the handouts, if you would just send me an email, my email address is up there, send me an email and ask for those, and I will send them out immediately. They're both in PDF format, so they're really accessible and easy to email to people.
Great. And let's see, one other question here, Kim. I missed the first few minutes. What is the total length of time we should plan for the event itself?
Okay. Dietra, do you remember exactly how much time we scheduled in for yours?
I think we built in a 4-hour window.
And that was for registration, and then you had several dignitaries.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so that was kind of a bigger, normally if you're just doing a simulation and it's not part of a speaking event and there's not a refreshment break period and all of that, 2 hours to 2.5 hours is ideal. If you are going to have 2 or 3 people speak before we start with the introduction, you need to add that in. The 1 hour of 15-minute weeks takes about an hour and 15 minutes because we have breaks in between them. The introduction is in 2 parts because what we do is we explain the simulation, we assign people to their families, and then they go look at their packets, and then they may have questions, and so we sort of run through using the packets. So that is easily a half hour of time for those things. And then your debriefing, the debriefing really can go on and on. People have, during the simulation, things that happen, some people lose custody of their kids because they forgot and left them at daycare. Some people get evicted. Some people resort to doing illegal things in order to make ends meet. And these are experiences that they've never had before, and they have a lot to say about them. So the debrief can go as long as you want, ideally a half hour to 45 minutes for that. is a good amount of time. So 2.5 hours specifically that you're telling your participants to be there, another at least hour to get the room set up, another 45 minutes on the other end for us to clean everything up. So the room itself, the space, we need for 4 to 5 hours, your participants 2.5 hours.
Great. And that looks like all the questions.
All right. Well, if no one else has any questions, I'll ask Dietra. Is there anything that you're thinking, wow, we should have said this?
No, Kim, I think you did a great job with covering all the basics. But I just wanted to encourage people to, reach out to us to ask those questions as they're planning for their simulations, and definitely consider, broadening it and including various people in your community. I can say that it's, almost the end of January, and people are still talking about the poverty simulation and their experience. And then for those individuals who were not able to attend, they are talking about it because they heard about it from other people. So, our elected officials are excited about what they've heard. Our school districts are excited. We have one school district who's actually having their first simulation coming up in March, and the other school district who's really considering having one this year as well. And, it was because I believe we included so many people from our community that we were able to create ambassadors to get the word out about the work that we do.
And Dietra, I'm glad you mentioned the school districts because that's something we are so excited about. We went and facilitated a poverty simulation for Mohawk Valley Community Action, and then that led to the Rome School District saying we should do this for our staff. We should do this for all of the people who are working with kids in our district. And so we're going back and facilitating a poverty simulation for the school district, and we're really excited because we think that's a great way to spread the word about, what it really is like to live in a very low-income household.
Yeah.
So that's something that we're thrilled about that came of the Mohawk Valley event.
That's great, and that actually, Kim, leads into another question that we just got. Do you have a recommendation for the best time of day for the simulation, day versus evening, weekday, workday?
That really depends on your target audience, and we can talk about that. I'm doing all of the setting up of the tour stop site visits. So I'll be more than happy to talk to you about how the poverty simulation fits into it, and then also how the simulation fits into your bigger tour stop and how we can fit all the pieces together. But your target audience is a big piece of deciding when is the best time of day to do something.
And we just got another question. Is there a fixed cost for the simulation?
If we're coming to your community to do a tour stop this year and we have not done a simulation for your agency yet, then the simulation, one simulation, is included in the tour stop without a cost. Beyond that, this year we were able to write simulations in as trainings in our work plan. So each agency, we can sort of work one-on-one, but as long as we can sort of bill this as a regional training in your area, we may be able to do it at no cost. Moving forward, we expect we'll be able to do simulations, but we may not always be able to cover the travel expense in our NYSCAA budget. So what we may end up having to do is ask if you want us to come to your agency and do one to cover the expense of us driving there, and if we have to stay over, staying over. When we do them outside the network, so for example, Dietra has connected us to the Rome School District, and now we are working with them and with Mohawk Valley together to have a simulation for the school district, and we negotiated a price with the school district to pay for that event.
Great. All right, looks like there are no other questions.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for considering having a simulation be part of your tour stop. We think it's a great way to raise awareness, and I certainly welcome hearing from all of you, and in fact if you're having a simulation I will be in touch with you and setting that all up, so I look forward to that. Thanks Phoebe, thanks Dietra.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.